Most people hear three magic words and instantly feel safe: decentralized finance, freedom, independence, and right away they start telling themselves a comforting story that this system can't be controlled, that it can't be manipulated, that nobody is really in charge. But the moment you stop repeating slogans and start watching behavior, the truth gets ugly. The same human hunger for power, status, and certainty quietly survives every new technology. It just changes uniforms. Bitcoin is presented as the antidote to concentration of power. Yet the more you look, the more you realize it might be the cleanest, glossiest packaging for that same concentration, with a perfect camouflage. And today, I'm not going to ask you to believe me. I'm going to ask you to notice what you already do when the price moves. The flinch in your stomach, the compulsive checking, the way a rumor can yank your mood like a puppet. That's not freedom. That's conditioning. Let's talk about what decentralized finance really is, who benefits when the story gets too good to be true, and why you might be helping concentrate power while thinking you're escaping it. Bitcoin is sold to you as absolute financial liberty, like a final escape from banks printing money, governments tightening screws, and wealthy elites playing chess with the rest of humanity. The pitch is emotional before it's technical. It doesn't start with code. It starts with resentment. It begins with the idea that you were robbed, that you were controlled, and that you finally found the weapon to take yourself back. That's why the visuals matter. The charts, the green candles, the red candles, the never-ending feed of updates. Every twist, every tweet, every government comment feels like a cliff edge. People say it's decentralized, which sounds like nobody is in charge. But watch what your body does. Watch what markets do. When something changes, millions of people act like they all share one nervous system. That nervous system reacts to the same invisible hands. Not because the system is truly democratic, but because the story is built to trigger the same psychological reflexes: hope, fear, missing out, confirmation bias, herd behavior. Now here's the first uncomfortable question. Why does a system marketed as freedom require you to obsess daily, sometimes hourly, just to feel okay? If you truly had sovereignty, you wouldn't need constant reassurance from a price ticker. You wouldn't need your day to be governed by color changes on a screen. What you call information is often just emotional training. You're learning to treat volatility as destiny. You're learning to confuse attention with participation. And that's where the hidden self comes in. Many people don't just want money, they want relief from helplessness. They want a way to feel that the future is not locked behind someone else's power. So when a narrative arrives that promises escape, people grab it like a life raft. But life rafts can be rigged. Bitcoin's story begins with scarcity. The famous number 21 million. The idea that there will never be more, that scarcity equals value, that you're buying the closest thing to digital gold, and that it's impossible for anyone to control it. It's a beautiful marketing line. It hits a deep part of human psychology. The brain loves scarcity because scarcity creates urgency and status. Humans don't just want resources. They want to be the kind of person who owns rare resources. We don't simply buy gold. We buy the identity attached to gold. So the number becomes a charm. People repeat it like a prayer. 21 million, 21 million, 21 million. But scarcity is only meaningful when it's real, bounded, and relevant. What matters is not just how many units exist in some abstract sense. What matters is how those units can be divided, transferred, and represented in markets. Bitcoin is divisible. It's not a solid block that stays neatly intact like a coin in your palm. Each Bitcoin can be split into smaller units called satoshis. The community often treats the 21 million figure like the only number that matters because it's emotionally simple. It's easy to visualize. It's easy to brag about. It's easy to turn into a poster. But if you do the math in a way that actually reflects how trading works, the scarcity becomes less like a wall and more like a frame. A framing device designed to make you feel you're getting something rare even when you're buying into a belief system that produces rarity on demand. Imagine someone tells you there are only 21 pizza pies on the planet. That sounds scarce. You might even get competitive. You might even plan your life around getting one pie. Now imagine each pie can be cut into a billion slices, and each slice is traded in 1,000 marketplaces, represented on countless spreadsheets, bundled into products, insured, fractionalized, rewrapped into different forms for different investors. Suddenly, the only 21 pizzas line becomes a theatrical prop. The scarcity is not gone, but it has been relocated into the story rather than the reality. And this matters because markets don't only price assets, they price belief about future belief. They price narratives about narratives. When people buy Bitcoin, many of them aren't buying scarcity as a physical constraint. They're buying scarcity as an identity and a psychological contract. They're buying the permission to believe, I can be early to something unstoppable. So when you ask, is it really scarce? The answer is both yes and no, depending on which layer you mean. But the crucial point isn't the exact arithmetic. The crucial point is that the scarcity story is engineered to anchor your expectations, and expectations are where the true leverage sits. If you want to understand power concentration in decentralized finance, stop staring at code and start staring at the flow of incentives, because belief systems need distribution, and distribution needs gatekeepers. Let's move to another piece of gloss. Bitcoin ETF products. They're marketed as accessibility, as mainstream adoption, as a bridge between your ordinary life and the revolutionary asset. But an ETF is not a magic portal into freedom. An ETF is a tradable wrapper. It's a certificate that represents an underlying asset without giving you direct control over it. Think of the analogy. You invest money, and you receive a piece of paper that says something like, somewhere in the system, someone holds the thing. You don't hold the gold, you hold the claim. Most people already live in a world of claims. Your paycheck is a claim. Your bank balance is a claim. Your credit score is a claim. Even your identity documents are claims recognized by institutions. So when you buy an ETF, you're not escaping that world, you're integrating into it. And the integration changes who bears risk and who gets to govern the plumbing. The wrapper may be easier to buy, but it does not remove control. It simply reassigns it behind layers of paperwork. Now here's where it becomes psychologically disturbing, because people who wanted decentralized freedom often feel proud of being inside the revolution. They treat the ETF as proof that the old system has acknowledged the new one. But the emotional reward is built on a misunderstanding. With a direct asset, you can at least imagine possession. With an ETF wrapper, you are relying on custodians, administrators, compliance structures, and the legal frameworks of major jurisdictions. You are, in practice, outsourcing custody and operational authority. And those operational authorities are not democratic. They are owned by entities that have the power to manage keys, manage access, manage reporting, and manage reactions to regulatory pressure. So the question is simple: who issues the wrapper? Who controls the custody chain? Who interacts with the regulators? Who decides what happens when they get uncomfortable? In other words, the ETF doesn't just make Bitcoin tradable, it makes Bitcoin compatible with centralized enforcement. Bitcoin can be held and represented across a spectrum of custody arrangements. That's not automatically evil, but it can be used to concentrate leverage. A single apple can be sliced and sold 100 ways. The apple doesn't magically multiply, the claims do. The paperwork does. The parties selling claims do. And if those parties are already giants, then you are handing them another channel to extract value. The people you were told to fear, the old gatekeepers, often do not lose power when Bitcoin becomes mainstream. They adapt, they repackage, they become the middle layer that collects friction. So while the marketing focuses on not being controlled, the financial reality can still be. You are not in control of custody, compliance, or market infrastructure. Now let's go deeper. Even if the core idea is decentralized, the system still needs people to change it. Software doesn't update itself. Networks don't govern themselves. Decisions must be made by humans and institutions. So when someone tells you Bitcoin is democratic because anyone can participate, you should ask which part they mean. Anyone can broadcast a transaction. Anyone can download a client. Anyone can theoretically verify. But the ability to influence the rules that software follows is not evenly distributed. There are core developers, there are maintainers, there are influential contributors, there are release processes, there are governance dynamics. Even if no one controls the network, influence is still concentrated in who can ship changes, who can coordinate patches, and whose standards become the default. Then there are mining pools. Mining is the physical bottleneck, not because miners are mystical wizards, but because hashing power and coordination matter. Pools aggregate resources. Pools negotiate incentives. Pools decide how they distribute rewards. Pools can, in edge cases, gain enough control to influence outcomes. Bitcoin has built-in assumptions to prevent catastrophic central control, like the threat people discuss when they talk about overwhelming major portions of mining power. But here's the psychological trap. People treat those scenarios as hypothetical horrors that could never happen or would be too unlikely. Reality is less comforting. Control doesn't have to be absolute. It only has to be sufficient to pressure the system during moments of stress. If a few large pools can coordinate, they can create conditions that force economic actors to react. And economic actors react by behaving like people in a crowded theater. If the lights flicker, everyone panics at once. That's why decentralized can still feel like a dictatorship from the perspective of the end user. The user doesn't experience governance. The user experiences consequences, and consequences come when some subset of actors can move the system through leverage and timing. Then there's a more brutal concentration, ownership concentration. Most people imagine the Bitcoin economy like a crowd at a festival. They imagine thousands of independent participants. They imagine everyone is roughly equal in influence. It feels fair because it looks open, but the distribution of wealth is not a fairness fairy. It is math, time, and compounding. Early adopters win, and wealth tends to consolidate unless there's a mechanism forcing redistribution. So when you look at on-chain data, you find that a very small percentage of wallets hold a very large portion of Bitcoin. A tiny number of participants control a massive amount of the asset. This changes everything, because it means that the market is not simply 1,000 independent minds. It's a few players with large leverage and many smaller players with reactive psychology. Now let's use a metaphor that exposes the hidden power dynamic. Imagine poker. You're sitting down with a handful of chips. You feel like the game is about skill and choices. You think every hand is a fair test of your strategy. But there's another table pattern. Some players walked in years ago. They have mountains of chips. They don't need to win every hand. They only need to wait, apply pressure, and exploit the fear of people who entered late. They can raise or stall. They can change the pace. They can make you feel that if you don't act now, you'll lose everything. In that environment, you aren't free. You're being managed through risk and emotion. And in crypto markets, those emotions are amplified. Price isn't just information. Price is a social signal. People judge themselves against it. People justify past decisions using it. People feel shame when it drops and euphoria when it rises. So when large holders sell or accumulate, the entire crowd experiences it as gravity, and the crowd interprets it with trembling hope. This is the psychological mechanism that makes concentrated wealth dangerous in a supposedly decentralized system. Concentrated wealth isn't only about holding coins, it's about shaping expectations, steering liquidity, and controlling timing. If you want a simple formula, it's this: concentrated assets plus concentrated communication equals concentrated influence. Even when there's no single ruler, influence emerges from the ability to move market conditions and affect the collective narrative. Now let's address another uncomfortable point: nation-state involvement. People love the idea that Bitcoin is beyond borders, beyond governments, beyond law. But Bitcoin trades in real life. Real life is messy and jurisdictioned. Bitcoin is priced primarily in major fiat currencies. For most global flows, that means the US dollar. Big institutions operate through US financial systems. Major custody arrangements interact with US compliance structures. Regulatory approval of exchange-traded products and major compliance frameworks creates a dependency on US oversight. So while Bitcoin is marketed as not owned by any entity, it is deeply embedded in a world where major enforcement power comes from nation-states. This is where people become willfully naive. They think freedom means freedom from everyone forever. But freedom always exists inside constraints. In practice, the constraint is often the jurisdiction of the largest infrastructure providers. Ask yourself, what would happen if the US government decided to tighten enforcement for a category of activity related to mining, custody, exchanges, or large-scale settlement? If those nodes are significant, the system would feel it quickly. Not because the code is fragile, but because the real economic pathways connecting participants to the network rely on legal permission. So Bitcoin might survive technically, but your access, your on-ramps, your off-ramps, your legal ability to transact, and your ability to cash out at scale can be pressured. That doesn't require a ban forever. It only requires temporary friction at key points. Friction creates panic. Panic creates sell pressure. Sell pressure creates cascading liquidations. And once again, the crowd reacts like a single organism. So here's the real paradox. Bitcoin is born from a desire to escape the strongest controllers. Yet it can be pulled back into the grip of those same controllers through infrastructure and regulation. It's like a bird supposedly released into the sky. It flies, it circles, it explores. And then, because of instinct, because of gravity, because of the place it knows best, it lands back on the familiar pole. The pole is power. So the question isn't only whether a network is decentralized in its technical design. The question is whether the people who matter to your life experience power in a concentrated way. Now let's talk about the most important engine behind all of this. The engine isn't code, it's belief. Central banks print money. That's obvious. But money is not the only thing being printed. Governments and institutions also print confidence. Confidence is the hidden currency of modern finance. Bitcoin runs on an even subtler machine. It prints belief using narratives that spread faster than reality can correct them. The scarcity story, the freedom story, the anti-inflation story, the no one can control it story, the digital gold story. These narratives don't just inform people, they shape the collective expectation of future price movement. And price movement becomes the proof that the narrative is working, which then attracts more people, which then pushes price higher, which then confirms the narrative again. It's not a simple cause and effect chain, it's a feedback loop. When you see good news, like approvals from major regulators or large companies accepting Bitcoin or institutional adoption headlines, the price jumps. People attribute it to math, to scarcity, to supply constraints. But the psychological mechanism is that belief is increased. Money flows because confidence increased. The asset doesn't become rarer overnight. The belief becomes stronger overnight. That's why price moves. Then when you see bad news, like exchange failures, regulatory threats, or government crackdowns, the narrative weakens, confidence drops, people rush for exits. Again, scarcity arguments don't help because belief breaks. So Bitcoin behaves like a global pendulum of collective emotion. Hope, fear, excitement, panic. That's not an accident. It's how markets work when participants are not guided by fundamentals, but by a story about future attention. And the most brutal part is this. If the value depends on collective belief, then the holders of that belief have leverage.